Allô Geoffrey?
Oui, allô?
Oui,
Bonjour.
bonjour, ça va?
Hello
Oui, toi?
Geoffrey,
Très bien, salut.
Allez.
ça va?
Ça va, merci.
Bon, c'est
Ah,
Simon qui commence?
non, c'est moi qui vais commencer.
Ah,
Simon,
d'accord.
Simon, il est sur le salon et du coup, il est occupé à autre chose.
Ok,
Ok,
bon
d'accord.
bah super, super.
Et oui, puis donc, Rachel, c'était ma proposition pour l'invitation, donc ça fait sens que je puisse dire quelques mots pour l'accueillir, et puis voilà quoi. Et puis bon, je pense sur l'intro. Vous avez le lien éventuellement, les gars, de l'introduction, vous savez, où il y a les consignes disons celles qui vont bien, là, pour pas désactiver les micros, tout ça, ou...
Alors moi j'ai mis un post-it à l'entrée
Ok.
de la salle, disant que de bien garder leur microphone off, quoi.
Ok.
Mais par
Ah
contre,
non, mais sinon Olivier il
j'ai pas
arrive,
le slide.
on a quelques slides pour ça, mais moi je l'ai pas
Ouais,
bookmarké, donc c'est Olivier, il va arriver avec et ça sera prêt.
Ok, d'accord. Parce que là, nous,
d'accord.
on n'a pas.
Après, j'ai peut-être ceux d'hier, je regarde, hein.
Ouais, regarde si t'as fait les gars. Parce que moi,
Je regarde. Pas celui-là, hein.
change les pages.
Défile, attends, où je peux défiler,
Ouais.
je peux défiler. Non, effectivement celui-là c'est celui d'hier avec le programme d'hier.
Et il n'y a pas juste après
Ah oui,
les
mais attends, si,
consignes?
parce qu'en fait il y a celui de... Non, si, c'est bon, regarde, il y a le 8 juillet... Ouais, Olivier est derrière moi, il me dit qu'effectivement il y a tout dans le même, donc c'est parfait, c'est celui-là.
Bah voilà, super.
Bon bah par contre du coup il va falloir qu'on skip des trucs parce que là ça c'est les bêtises assez... On s'en fiche effectivement, c'est un peu... C'est une catastrophe, putain, ça... Bon ok, ça aussi, ok... Ok, ce que je vais faire, attends, ça c'est un lien Drive a priori. Je vais le reprendre et je vais masquer toutes les slides qui me... Ouais. Okay. Hi, do we have everybody here? Hi, Rachel. Nice to meet you. My name is Jeffrey.
Hi, how are you?
I'm fine, thanks. What about you?
I'm good, thanks. Yeah, my mic's working okay anyway, is it?
Yeah, that's nice.
Great.
Thanks for coming. So we should start in a few minutes. Just let me check there, and I'll be back in 5 seconds. Let's wait 1 minute, and we will start the presentation. So with few words to introduce, the good practices, and then I'll introduce Rachel McDonnel, who's here, and yes, so let's wait just 1 minute, please. Thanks. Hi, Albert. Please have a seat. We should start in a few minutes. Non, c'est moi qui ai le contrôle, Olivier. Okay, so hi everybody, nice to meet you. My name is Jeffrey. I'm a French researcher, and I'm glad to welcome you all for this morning regarding the presentations. So at first, I hope we will have a few people coming for Rachel's talk, but I'll introduce the presentation and give you a few words regarding the good practices. So if I can control the screen. Okay, so today we have Rachel's talk starting at 10. So Rachel is an associate professor of creative technologies at Trinity College Dublin. I'm glad she made it today, and I'm very pleased to welcome her for this presentation. So she is well known for her research regarding virtual characters, agents, and avatars, both in VR and computer graphics. So the keynote, the talk is entitled this morning. Just one sec, because I do have the title, Rachel, here. Oh, maybe you have your title. I do not have the the good page on my screen.
Sure, no problem. It's photorealistic virtual humans have arrived and they are here to stay, but do we have enough understanding of how humans perceive them?
Thank you very
It's a
much.
bit of a
Great.
long one, sorry.
No, but that sounds very good. So thank you for the title. And then we will have like during the afternoon a panel regarding do it together. So my name is not Simon Richer, but he's my boss. Okay, he's not here this morning, so that's why I'm introducing this talk. So a few tips before starting the presentation. First, please keep your mic off using the dedicated button, and you can also access the full screen mode with the button on the top left corner. If you have any question after the talk and Rachel's presentation, please feel free to ask them directly in the chat or using the raise your hand button. You can also, in the virtual world, use the blue zones, to talk, like for the private talks with some people around. The proceedings of the conference are accessible on the IJVR website for free, so feel free to have a look to the paper published this year. And yep. Okay, so this is not very important. And okay, so this is the title. Here it is. So photorealistic virtual humans have arrived and are here to stay. But do we have a deep enough understanding of how humans perceive them? So Rachel, it will be your turn. So I'm glad to welcome you here. And if you want to take the control of the screen, we are here to listen to you talk.
Great, thanks, Jeffrey. Can everyone see that okay? Hear me?
Yes.
Yep. That
Oh, okay.
sounds good.
Sounds good. Okay, great. Oh, thanks so much, everybody, for welcoming here. I'm delighted to be here to talk about photorealistic virtual humans. Apologies for the long title. So yeah, I'm from Trinity College Dublin, and I've been researching in virtual humans since my PhD back in 2006. So I just want to start off to give a quick overview of the talk today. So I'm first going to talk about virtual humans in general, the kind of realism evolution that they've gone through, just very briefly, and then some applications of virtual humans, some current ones. Then I'll talk very briefly again on perceptual methods and the way that we do perception. Then the main part of the talk will be the experiments. So I'm just going to, hand select a couple of our experiments that have looked at appearance of virtual humans, so looking at photorealism, but also on interaction, since this is Laval virtual. I thought maybe the virtual reality experiments that we've done would be more interesting, so I focused quite a bit on those, and then we'll do some conclusions. Okay, so slide. Here we go. Okay, so this is Petrina. So this character was one of the very first characters that I ever worked with during my research in virtual humans back in the early 2000s. I suppose people might recognize this kind of quality of human. You can just see even there's like anti-aliasing. It's just a simple texture applied to her face, and very little. There's no normal maps or any subsurface scattering or anything interesting particularly there. But this was the kind of state of the art at the time, and I guess a lot of my time. A lot of my research has been trying to work with more realistic virtual humans. I've always been really fascinated by virtual humans and their potential. I've always kind of dreamed of the day where we could have virtual humans that would look more like us than poor Petrina back in 2000s. So since the since early 2000s, the technical pipeline for creating virtual humans has become very complex. This is just an example of our own technical pipeline in at Trinity College Dublin, where we just aim to try to replicate all of the kind of state of the art in the visual effects industries and gaming industries in order to get avatars of high enough quality. So there's the model creation stage. So I guess that's one of the main parts where the advancements has been model creation using photogrammetry, and Paul Devek's work on lighting and relighting characters has been a huge advancement there. And then obviously there's motion capture, so there's lots of different abilities for motion capture. We're still using the kind of Vicon visual effects type standard stuff. Then there's retargeting, where you apply the motion capture to the model. And again, there's lots of different ways this can be done. Neural networks are kind of the more modern approach. And then, of course, the visual display. So again, here we're talking a bit more about virtual reality, but obviously there's different ways of displaying virtual characters and running with Unity or Unreal or your own game engine in the background. So the reason really, I mean, this isn't a technical talk as such, but I just wanted to kind of briefly show the technical pipeline, because every stage of this pipeline, there are many choices to be made. So for virtual humans, for body animation, you know, we still use a lot of the techniques from the 2000s, like linear blend skinning and that. But for the faces, there's a lot of different choices that you can make. And with regard to how realistic they appear, oh, that's after moving on me. But anyway, the point being that there's lots of different choices. So, you know, depending on what choices we pick, like how do we retarget, how do we animate, we might end up with very different results. And I'm very interested in what those choices should be and to produce the best results. So this slide then is photorealism has arrived. So I'm just showing some very modern examples from Digital Domain and Epic Games, our Trilateral. The most recent kind of real-time virtual humans currently. And you know, I believe that we've really crossed the photorealism line. You know, these characters look very, very realistic, almost like a photo of a real person. So yeah, obviously with all the advancements in graphics hardware, ray tracing in real time, photogrammetry, we're able to achieve this. So I guess if you compare these characters to Patrina that I started off with, I guess you know, my main interest is what effect is that going to have on us going forward. So we have these photorealistic characters now, but what does that mean for us going forward, especially in terms of perception, because there's still a lot that we don't know about perception of these virtual humans. So, you know, generating humans that look this realistic, is this going to fundamentally change how we behave in VR or how we interact with characters in general? You know, questions like, will it heighten our empathy towards the characters or induce more fear in us, for example? So my title said that virtual humans are here to stay, and I do really believe that. So the typical uses of virtual humans in the past have been like gaming, VR, visual effects, movies, but there's a whole new range of virtual humans popping up in different domains, especially in like social media. So YouTubers, there's a Barbie YouTuber there who live streams to an audience. Virtual influencers who, you know, are on Instagram and they show off different clothing and brands. And then you have obviously the game cinematics, you know, are getting really realistic and almost like a real movie in between when you're doing gameplay, like the Formula 1 example here. But then also for virtual assistants, they're becoming more popular. So Samsung have introduced this Sam character who's going to take over the voice only assistant. And then you have companies like Soul Machines that are providing these keeps switching on me. Soul Machines that are providing virtual assistants for many different brands and virtual therapy. So I really believe that virtual humans are going to be here a lot more, and we're going to be interacting a lot more with virtual humans in the next 5 years. It's going to become much more commonplace to be talking to a virtual character, whether they're an agent or an avatar. We're going to see a lot of that. So again, I would like to make the point that I think there's still a lot we don't know about how the brain is perceiving these virtual characters. Does it feel like we're talking to a real person because they are, photorealistic, or does it feel like we're talking to a robot? And when the character is rendered in high realism, does that actually kind of blur this line between robot and real person, and what effect does that have on our perception? Okay, so that's basically what we're kind of looking at. Here's an example from Unreal Engine 5, the latest demo. So this is kind of what we can expect from video games in the future, this kind of high level of realism with lighting and virtual characters. So again, just posing the question here, if we're going to be immersed in highly photorealistic virtual environments like that, what difference is this going to have on our viewer perception and behavior? So for example, if you had a very traumatic kind of experience, or something with, that was kind of a traumatic experience in a game, is that going to result in heightened levels of excitement with the photorealism, or is it going to leave you with some sense of trauma afterwards? So these are questions that we haven't really been thinking about too much. We've been powering ahead with the graphics, which I think is amazing, but again, we need to think a little bit about what this is going to do for user perception. Now, I'm not a psychologist, so it's not really my area to go into that, but we are very interested in how humans perceive virtual humans. Okay, so slide. Okay, there we go. Okay, so this is the typical graph that we all show when we're talking about realism. So this is Maury's idea of hypothesis about the uncanny valley, which is where when human robots become, when they're not human-like, they don't really feel very familiar. The more human-like they appear, they become very familiar until a certain point where we call it the uncanny valley, where a supposed negative response occurs to these virtual characters, and then it goes out of the valley when it comes back to looking like a real person. So again, not sure right now where we are in this. I think we've come out of the valley, but again, this is just a hypothesis, and as you'll see from a lot of the research that I show today that we've been doing on photorealistic virtual characters, even in the last 5 years, have been rated as quite appealing in general. So perhaps not as down in the uncanny zone. And actually, there's a lot of nuance to the uncanny valley as well, like all the different choices that we can make with regard to our virtual characters and how they fit into this idea of uncanniness, or lack of appeal. Okay, so that leads me to kind of, if you were thinking about it as a developer and you wanted to create a virtual agent that's going to represent your brand, or if they were going to for example, be a virtual tutor to teach or to give therapy. Which agent appearance then should you actually pick? Should you go for the highly realistic virtual human appearance, or go for something more cartoony? There are different kind of, I suppose, pros and cons of this, with which to choose. And I guess things can depend on scenario as well. So, we've seen some examples where, cartoony characters are put in very serious situations, and this can kind of cause a negative reaction. So it's not always the realistic virtual humans that cause the negative reaction. Sometimes a cartoonish appearance may appear too lighthearted for a difficult scenario, or a more complex scenario. So again, it's quite nuanced as to which appearance to pick, but certainly if we can look a bit more at perception of these types of characters, we should be able to make more informed choices about that. Okay, so moving on to the second part of the talk, which is just to talk a little bit about perception. So the approach that we've taken in our lab is to investigate virtual humans using a kind of a looping effect. So we look at perception. So we're interested in how the human brain perceives the virtual characters. So we gain insights into this by running perceptual experiments using human subjects, and we then sorry, this is moving on me. We then develop metrics and then sometimes feed them back into the virtual systems to either improve upon or to create guidelines for developers on where to focus their attention. So there are different measures that we can use. There are different measures and methods that we can use in perception. So the most obvious choices would be the direct or conscious measures, and there's great literature out there with regard to subjective response scales, so things like Likert scales, two alternative force choice experiments. So this is basically where you're shown an image or a video of a virtual character, and you're asked to respond to that character on a scale. So it might be from highly unrealistic to realistic, or highly appealing to unappealing. And there are some standardized questionnaires on this. So if you look at the Godspeed questionnaire for Uncanny Valley, for example, and there's lots of standardized questions with regard to things like personality, if that's what you're interested to assess. And generally sticking with standardized questionnaires is a good idea, because you can compare your work then with others. But sometimes you have to create your own scales if they don't have the kind of things that you're looking for. So then direct scales have their place and they are great, but there are certain phenomena, and the Uncanny Valley is one that people kind of mention is one phenomenon that it's kind of hard to put your foot on exactly, or to put your finger on exactly what is causing this effect. So in that case, indirect or subconscious measures can be very, very useful as well to gain more insight. So these are things like behavioral measures, and virtual reality is absolutely amazing for subconscious measures, because inherently the user is often tracked in the virtual environment. So there are lots of kind of extra information that we can track, like their behavior. So for example, if you do full body tracking, you could record their motion and then do some analysis on that to determine, if their body is swaying, or if they're kind of recoiling against a character, for example. And there's also psychophysical response, so things like sweat and heart rate to determine. So again, these have been used extensively in virtual reality experiments for things like fear. So to show things like place illusion, if you feel really present in a room and you're given some fearful something that makes you have fear, then you will have a sweat response. And there's other things like bias and implicit tests that we can try as well. So social cognition. So trying to determine if your behavior towards these virtual characters is similar to how you behave socially in real life, and that gives you a sense of that you are really considering this character to look real. Okay, so they're just briefly the kind of methods that we use. So now I'm going to talk a bit more in detail about the experiments that we've conducted. So I'm going to start with the appearance experiment. So this basically, in the appearance experiment, this is where we set out to try to work out what are the most important parameters for the Uncanny Valley. So or for appeal towards virtual characters, or for realism. So this goes back to the technical pipeline that I showed at the start again. So as I said, there are so many different choices. One of the major advantages of virtual reality and virtual characters as opposed to robots as agents would be that you've got endless possibilities about how they can look, how they can interact, how they can animate. You're much more constrained with regard to physical materials and mechanics for a robot, whereas if you have a virtual agent, especially with with the virtual agent, you can I hope everyone can see my slides. If you can't, please shout. Yeah, so we're looking at all these different aspects that can be used to create a virtual character, and which of them have the most effect. Okay, so back in 2012, we worked in collaboration with Tübingen. We worked on render style. So this was the very first thing that we wanted to look at was let's see about rendering a virtual character in lots of different styles, and let's try lots of different experiments. So we did direct experiments, we did video experiments and everything, but I'm just going to kind of consider the direct experiments here. So in this case, we just let the an animator, or a modeler, just go in and light these characters to suit different styles. So we said, create the most photorealistic style you can, create the most kind of Pixar animation-y style, a line drawing, and we had lots of other styles besides these. These are just a subset. So the idea then was to have this exact same performance and audio across the different styles. So we wanted to remove the aspect of performance from this. So we wanted to keep the performance constant, because kind of up to then, any of the experiment or any of the hypothesis around uncanny valley, you could argue that, oh, maybe just that movie wasn't a good movie or something, that it was the performance that was the problem. So here we wanted to make sure the performance or the animation was exactly the same, but just change the render style. And as I said, in that case, we kept the geometry of the character constant, and we just changed the render style. I'm not going to talk about results at the end. I'll talk about the kind of experiments that we did first, and then I'll summarize the results that we got from all of them together. So then in 2015, we looked a bit closer at shape. So the idea of shape. So as I said, in 2012, we used the same realistic shape. In this case, then we went more for cartoony shapes. So again, we got a modeler to create a number of styles replicating those in the industry. And then we, at the top end of the shape realism, we had the a photogrammetry scan. So this was our levels of realism. So that was on our shape scale, but then we also wanted to independently alter material, so we could try to investigate independently the effect of material and shape. So what I mean by material, that's the texture map basically used to render the character. So you can see here that we applied the simple S0, M0 to all the different shapes. And similarly across here, we applied the same material across also. You can see at the top here, some of the examples get a bit creepy looking, because we're applying a realistic texture across all of the different shape examples. So we then ran a bunch of experiments on all these different shapes to see the effect of that. More recently then, so in the previous experiment, the original one, 2012, we didn't use lighting. The brightness of the light had no, we didn't control for that. So I always had this kind of idea that, okay, a cartoony rendering looks more appealing, but is that because it looks brighter for some reason? So we went very in detail into lighting in this paper in 2020. We presented last year at SIGGRAPH, where we separated the contrast, or the shadow and the brightness of the light that is being reflected off the face, and we had lots of different combinations where we look at them independently. Gone wrong again here, sorry. My slides are going ahead of me. Okay, so anyway, so we looked at different combinations of lighting to see the effect on the appeal of the character and on the realism. Are you seeing this? I hope everyone's not seeing these JavaScript errors coming up. Okay. I just keep moving on. So that was lighting. We looked at that in a lot of detail. And more recently, we've been looking at resolution. So with the oh, please not click on the screen. This will move slides. Okay. Oh, okay, so I'm clicking on the screen. All right. Okay, so the resolution of the virtual character. So there had been some work by McDormand and others in the past looking at resolution. So we thought this was an interesting one again to revisit in the context of highly realistic virtual humans. So if any of you haven't seen the MetaHuman creator from Unreal Engine, definitely worth checking out. Because in the creator you can create any virtual character that you want basically, and render it at really high level of realism in real time. One of the nice things about this is that it allows us to generate any levels of diversity that we didn't have in previous times. So creating virtual characters, you know, I showed you the technical pipeline. We've been aiming towards creating highly realistic virtual characters for years, and I've been collaborating with many visual effects companies to kind of get some sort of samples of their characters, but it's very expensive. So this this MetaHuman creator has just massively opened the door for people to work with kind of AAA level characters, and to be able to run experiments like these much quicker. And also, as I said, to ensure that you've got diversity in your characters and across their ethnicity and across their gender and everything. So we don't have to just stick with the one character. You know, a lot of the in the past, a lot of my experiments have been, you know, we've got one character that we've, you know, purchased off some AAA games company, and we have to stick with that. So it makes it difficult to test other other character types. Anyway, so this was an experiment on resolution to determine if the resolution had an effect on. So when I mean resolution, I mean the the number of polygons basically on the character. Okay, so I'm gonna try and play this video. I think I have to watch it on YouTube. See it earlier on. Okay, I hope everyone can see this. Sample just of the stimulus.
I feel wonderful today. The weather is beautiful here. The clouds are very pretty. I love when the sun frames the clouds from behind. It's my favourite view.
Okay, hopefully everybody could see that. So that's just an example of MetaHuman being animated that we were using in these experiments. Okay. Okay. So slide. Okay, so then after all of those experiments that we conducted, I'm just going to briefly go through the key findings that we had. So again, we did lots of different standardized questionnaires. We tried some behavioral methods and video methods as well, but I'm just going to mainly summarize what we did. So across all of the experiments that we did, both here in the kind of more static or on-screen experiments and in VR, we actually found realism to be an appealing choice across the board. So this, I guess, was a kind of you know, a bit contrary to the idea of the uncanny valley, perhaps. But yeah, we definitely found realism to be a positive choice. We found that characters that were hard to categorize were considered more eerie. So when I mean hard to categorize, they're the ones that they don't have a particular style, so that, you know, you can't say that looks like a Pixar character or that looks like a hand-drawn character, something that's in between, or that has a style maybe, or a kind of yeah, a style that you're not familiar with. Those were the ones that were considered more eerie in general. We found that shape was the main predictor of realism. So as if you remember in our first experiment, we used the same realistic face shape, and we just applied different textures to it to change the realism. But in the second experiment, we used different shapes. So I'm talking about big eyes, kind of for the geometry of the cartoony shape. So this was the main predictor of realism. So as long as you had a realistic shape, really didn't matter too much what materials you applied to it. It was still in a high level of realism. Whereas when you started changing the shape to be more cartoony, like a small nose and big eyes and all that, then that rapidly reduced the realism of the characters. That was kind of an interesting finding. Material, on the other hand, so the textures that we used was the main predictor of appeal, and this kind of follows on to you know, studies in the cosmetics industry. So and again, on our Zoom calls, a lot of us will put a kind of a blurring filter across the skins to make it more appealing. So yeah, material or the lack of detail, I guess, on the face was often predictor of appeal. So the more yeah, the more smooth it appeared, the more appealing. We found the lower geometric complexity to be more eerie than the more realistic characters across the board. So I thought this was an interesting finding, showing that, yeah, perhaps it isn't, you know, once you have a certain level of geometric complexity in your characters, they go beyond that eeriness. In the brightness experiments, we found lots of interesting results. One of them was that the brightness of the light source improves appeal. So this was a really strong result that we found across multiple experiments. So I suppose this is a nice one for developers, that if you have a virtual character and you want to improve the appeal, just brighten up the light that you're shining on it, you know, so don't keep it in the darkness. And I guess a lot of the preschooler movies have used this very well, this idea very well. So if you look at any preschool cartoons, you'll notice that the characters are nearly always just brightly lit. There's no shadows at all in them. So this creates that really nice, bright, appealing appearance. We also found that darker shadows, so if you've dark shadows, yeah, on those kind of cartoony characters, like in a preschool cartoon, that does make the characters more unappealing. So that certainly justifies the choice of these types of productions, that putting dark shadows on cartoony characters does not look appealing. However, we also found that dark shadows had no effect on the appeal of realistic characters. So maybe that's because we're more used to seeing real faces under a range of different illumination conditions. So we found that the dark shadows did not affect the appeal then of the realistic characters. So it didn't matter what way you had the darkness of the shadow on them. We found other things about lighting, such as the fact that the darker the shadow, the more difficult it was to recognize the emotion. I guess that's kind of an obvious one. But one of the things that we did find as well, just kind of separate to the investigation of photorealism, was that the light actually had an effect on how emotional you found a character. So a very bright light was able to increase the perception of happiness, and darker shadows did actually increase the perception of sadness. So again, these are kind of things that cinematographers use a lot. Anyway, they're tricks that they use a lot. But again, this was the first time that we kind of empirically investigated that. Okay, so that's the key findings there. So one other point I just want to discuss is some experiments that we looked at. So if, for example, I showed you these metahuman characters and I told you that there was a very simple way to determine how people are going to perceive them in terms of their personality traits, you know, so an instant, so again, the metahuman creator allows you to create any kind of character that you want, and you can change the distance between the eyes or anything you want. So what if I were to say that there are some choices that you could make as a developer, for example, or as a creator of a virtual human simulation, that could instantly make that character have a different effect. So I'm going to just show some of the potential ones. Now, I didn't actually measure these particular characters, but things like whether you instantly find the character untrustworthy, or that you find they look intelligent, dominant, or particularly trustworthy. So there are some features that we can use based on results in psychology that will help us to I suppose we could form a virtual character then that so for example, in the case of therapy, we might want a very trustworthy therapist, and what are the best parameters that we can use in order to achieve that. So we've done a lot of research into facial features over the years. So there's a lot of papers in psychology that look at real faces, and the main findings are very kind of conclusive, and they come out nearly the same every time. I've no citations here, but I can put some at the end. So for example, for wide faces, there's a measure called the width to height ratio that you can measure on a character. Something wrong with my slides again. Sorry. The width to height ratio that you can measure on characters, and this gives you an indication of whether the human is more dominant, more aggressive, less honest, and less appealing. And then also the size of the eyes, and it's not really to do with the actual size of the eyes, to do with the way that the lids are placed around the eyes, gives you indications of honesty and dominance. And again, these are kind of instant real world judgments that people make on people's faces, so we wanted to see if the similar judgments were made with virtual characters. So we and others have run experiments using virtual characters, and we found that the more realistic the character, the more similar the results were to real faces. For characters that were lower realism or non-humanoid, we had nearly all the same results, except that we, sorry, I'm being told not to click on this. Apologies. Now it's gone altogether. That. Apologies. Yeah, we're back. I'm going to try not to click on that. Yeah, so for kind of less humanoid virtual humans, we found that the results kind of weren't as similar to the real face. And I guess this kind of gives us evidence that that we are perhaps judging more realistic virtual humans more like real humans. So already this is a step towards this whole idea that I'm wondering about, whether we treat virtual humans more like real. Okay. Oh, you're seeing that JavaScript pop up. Okay, I'm sorry about that. Maybe if I remove this over here, might help. Okay, so yeah, yeah, I guess this kind of points us towards the fact that we can use results from real world psychology studies in order to create virtual properties of virtual humans that might be particularly interesting for us for particular scenarios. And the more realistic the virtual characters, the more similar that we feel they will adhere to the rules of real faces. Okay. So how should I move on without clicking on the, not letting me do it? Oh, there's a button down here. Okay, maybe I'll try that. Okay, so next I'm going to talk a bit, I know I'm short on time, I'm going to talk a little bit about the interaction experiments that we conducted, so the VR experiments. So as we all know, the VR environments are very nice in terms of analyzing behaviors of humans within virtual environments. So there are a number of different measures that we can use. Things like the one that we were particularly interested in is proximity. And I think this is a really interesting one as well in the Laval virtual world. So this idea of proximity in the real world is where people give a certain amount of space when they walk up to somebody, or if you're talking to somebody, you'll generally, so for example, if it was a business associate, you'd give them a certain amount of distance, and these distances have been measured in the real world, the social norms, for example, or if you were talking with a friend, you would have a closer proximity. And I find it really interesting coming into the virtual world here that sometimes your character kind of goes very close to other people by mistake, and it does actually feel kind of you feel a little bit what's the word, kind of impolite when that happens, I guess. So this is because you're thinking about the way that social proximity works in real life. So this is a really interesting one to measure in virtual reality, and how so even in this world, if we by mistake become very close to somebody, we'll generally pull ourselves back to an acceptable level. Mimicry is another one that's used in as a behavioral measure. So if you're really present with the virtual character in an environment and you feel very like they really exist there, you might start mimicking their gestures like we do in real life. The length of time spent in virtual reality is another indication sometimes as to how comfortable you are with the virtual character. For example, the more time you spend chatting with them. Okay, so if the character then is expressing some behavior correctly, the social presence with the character will be stronger and behavior will be closer to real life interactions. These are the kind of theories that people have on the topic. So yeah, that word social presence, in case anyone doesn't know it, it's the sensation that a character coexists in a space with the user and possesses a form of intelligence. So I guess it means that you really feel that this agent that's in the room with you is alive in some way. Okay. So we conducted a bunch of experiments. Again, I'm just going to discuss briefly the experiments and then summarize the results of them. So a lot of this work was done with my colleague Katja Žibrick, who's now in INRIA in Rennes. So close enough to here. So experiment 1, we looked at a number of different render styles as an Unreal Engine. We used a very, very simple environment. We didn't want environment to have any effect. In this case, we just did some simple motions with the character. There was no real interaction with the character. The interaction was just you made almost like a game. You made the character jump and do different things. And then the proximity in that case was you had to walk up to the character, and there was we followed the proximity protocols from previous work by Bailenson, where you had to walk up and there was a word written in front of the character, and the distance at which you walk to them was the measure of the proximity. So we felt the proximity could be a really good measure of affinity towards a character. So if they're realistic and you like them and you feel you feel good about that character, you're more likely to get closer. So this was the whole hypothesis that we had in these experiments. So the second experiment then, the first one, the interaction we didn't feel was kind of personal enough. So in the second one, we had personality. So the character was expressing different personality traits and was chatting to you for about a minute. And we ran this experiment in our local science gallery, which is a really good, if you have something like that in your city, it was a great way to get the public interacting with virtual reality. So we had over 1,100 participants take part in this experiment where they interacted with virtual characters. And we went for some very unappealing styles like a zombie just to check how much that they would recoil from that character as opposed to the other ones. So I have an example here. I don't know if we can see it.
Look, I can't believe that I give you this. I give you the car for 1 day. 1 day. And look, it's destroyed. It's ruined. And I have the biggest meeting of my life tomorrow, and I can't get to it because the car has been destroyed. The boss is going to think that I crashed the car because I'm not even, it's meant to be a company car. I'm not meant to give it to people. And now I have to come up with some reason why I can't make it there
because it keeps going on and on. But that was just an example of a disagreeable character. But we followed the psychology literature on that and created all these different personalities. Oh yeah, I'm probably pressing that one. We created all these personality types to try to convey different personalities. And we in a previous study, we showed that those personalities were coming through. So again, we wanted to see what the interactions were. Would you come closer to the character that had a kind of negative personality, or would it be worse in the case? So for example, if the character was a cartoony character with a negative personality, you might be less threatened than if it was a more photorealistic character. In experiment 3, then we started, the previous experiments were all done in kind of unrealistic environments, whereas here we went for photorealism in the environment as well as in the character, because we felt that this would really immerse the participants within the environment. So we threw out everything at this experiment. We also did it with the full embodiment. So we did full body motion capture with our Vicon, and we measured proximity using the joint angles of the of the recorded motion sequences. And then finally, we ran another version, a larger scale version of this, again in the Science Gallery with over 600 participants. So the general experiment design for all 4 of those experiments were the participant came in, they were given their motion capture set up in VR. They then went into a training room where they did the proximity task without the character. So we might have had a pillar or something instead of there. Then they went into the experiment room and the character was expressing some personality or scenario. And then afterwards they were asked to do a questionnaire, and a lot of the time we put the questionnaire within the virtual environment so they didn't have to lose that place illusion. Okay, I'll see if I can run quickly this. I don't know if we've much time. I'll just keep going because the video will take a bit too long. So we ran various kind of standardized questionnaires on place illusion, meaning the sensation that you're in the room, social presence, that you're with another human being, and then other personality traits and empathy. We were also interested in empathy because we really felt that that photorealism could enhance empathy. So quickly, I'll go through the results. One of our hypotheses was that the realistic style would increase place illusion and social presence, and we found that this was the case pretty much across the board, that the place illusion, so the feeling that you were in the place and your social presence with the virtual character was increased with increasing realism. And this, I think, is an important finding because it means that you know, if it can help to increase those illusions, then we have to wonder what other effects it might have. Now, the social presence was low for some of our experiments because we had no interaction. And again, I think this points to the fact that social interaction is more important probably than the photorealism anyway. But we did find differences once we added things like eye gaze to the mix. Apologies, my slides are going all over the place again. And okay, so that was place illusion. We also hypothesized that the style would increase empathetic or emotional response. Our results were a bit nuanced, but we did find some evidence for this. You know, it wasn't super clear cut, but there was evidence to show that the people were more concerned for photorealistic characters when they were expressing sad scenarios. But you know, one of the things here was that the empathetic response was higher, usually in the context of the personality. So if the character looked very distressed, like the character we showed there, that would have had a higher reaction from them than the photorealism. And then the other one was that hypothesis was that style would increase proximity so that you'd get closer to the realistic rendered style. And we didn't find evidence for this across all of the experiments that we tried, even the one where we did full body mocap, and it was a really kind of a natural scenario where the person had to just walk past the character and pick up something behind them. We didn't find that. I believe that one of the reasons was that proximity uh, yeah, that the realism had no difference. A lot of the time, people were coming close to the characters that they found interesting. So, for example, in the case where we put the zombie character or the zombie appearance, people actually came closer to that character than recoiling from it. And we believe it was more to do with the interest, kind of going, oh, what is that character? You know, so obviously without the major amount of interaction, it was just about interest, really. So proximity didn't really work for us in terms of investigating realism or affinity towards different styles. But we did find effects, so you know, typical effects like in gender, where the males were more comfortable in general getting closer to the characters. The people were generally more comfortable with the sad character as well. So there was some effects of proximity, just not the ones we expected. We since ran an experiment where we looked at a different measure of proximity, which I think is probably a learning experience for us. In this case, the proximity was done where the character walks towards you and you click a button at the very moment when you feel that you're uncomfortable in that space. So this one worked very well for us. Now, we didn't look at photorealism here, but we looked at the walk animation of the characters, and the results there really replicated the real world. And one of the interesting findings we found there was that the more appealing walk people felt, you know, if just based on the walk cycle, which was motion capture from real people, people felt that the appealing ones could come closer to them than the unappealing ones. So there is evidence there that proximity will work for affinity, but we haven't yet been able to show it for realism. Okay, so I'm conscious of time, so just quickly to conclude, I suppose one of the main points I want to make today is that there's very complex interactions of virtual characters. There's so many things that you can do with virtual characters, and we've shown across many of our experiments, even other ones besides the ones here, that these things do make a difference. So render style makes a difference, lighting makes a difference, material makes a difference, and it can affect things like perception of emotion, personality, and you know, even empathy. So virtual characters appearance, yeah, it does affect how we behave. So again, we've done a lot of behavioral experiments that didn't show here, but it can really affect things like your trust and your even immoral decisions that you make. In the future, as I said at the start, I believe that there'll be lots and lots of interactions with virtual characters, social media, VR, virtual assistants. We're going to become very, very familiar with working with virtual humans. And I think, again, we need to try to understand more what effect the different parameters have and how we can best use virtual characters for the purposes that we want. The references I put across the thing, I didn't give much detail, but we ran 2 courses, both at SIGGRAPH and Eurographics last year, and a lot of the references are from those papers. So if you want to take a look at those, it's kind of a summary of the different experiments all in one place. And there's another we have a book chapter coming out in the handbook on socially interactive agents with Catherine Pélachaud, I think, who might be here, is editing. So that should have lots of details on these kind of effects as well. And finally, a big thank you just to my team, sponsors and collaborators, especially Couture Gibrick. A lot of the work here was work that she worked with me on, but lots of people behind the work. So thanks again to everybody for coming, and I'm very, very happy to take any questions that you might have now. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Rachel, for this fascinating overview of your research. So people, if you enjoyed the talk, please press F4 on your keyboard just to... Yes, thanks. So if you have any question, please feel free to ask your question in the chat or directly using your microphone. And we have a few minutes to answer some questions. Maybe while you're writing your questions, I can start. Rachel, would you like to tell us a bit more regarding your very last paper published in Frontiers with, like for instance, I guess Rebecca is part of the authors, you know, regarding
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Rebecca was part of our lab. Yeah, so we wrote a paper recently in Frontiers. So I think, you mean the one where we looked at, so we were very interested to do lots of virtual reality experiments, but as you know, we're all kind of caught up at the moment and working remotely.
Yep.
So we kind of moved a bit into the idea of investigating body ownership, but over Zoom calls as avatars. So we use these avatars to determine, to have conversations across Zoom and determine how embodied a person was within their avatar. So we investigated things there like how difficult it might be to talk to somebody. So as you can see now, we're all represented as kind of cartoony avatars, but one of the things that questions might be, do you feel comfortable talking as your cartoon avatar about maybe more difficult topics or happier topics, or is there a barrier there? But we found that people had no problem talking about more difficult topics as their virtual avatars across these Zoom calls. And they also found it easier to detect people's emotion when they were as an avatar, as opposed to just the voice. But again, we had full facial, real-time facial capture there, so we could kind of determine people's emotions nicely, which I guess is the next step, right? In even virtual worlds like this, we'll be able to animate the faces, and we can kind of see a bit more what people are emoting, you know.
Yes, thank you very
Yeah.
much. And what do you think, regarding VR and facial expressions? I mean, because in this experiment, you can use like facial tracking, but as soon as we use the headsets, it's like a bit different. So, do you have something to say regarding facial animations in VR?
In VR, yeah, I mean, yeah, so we have the HTC Vive face tracker, so we're kind of working with that a little bit at the moment. I'm fascinated to see that. I think that's going to be a big step towards really being present with somebody, to be able to see their face animating as well. And I mean, Facebook Reality Labs are doing great work on avatar, you know, really getting the facial animation highly realistic, even when you have the headset over your face. I mean, this is one of the issues, obviously, occluding the eyes. But there's ways of tracking the eyes within the tracker, and then you can track the lower body, lower mouth separately. So yeah, I mean, I think facial animation in VR is definitely going to be the next kind of big advancement. Yeah, but again, I'm very interested in, you know, if we're portraying the emotion correctly across the virtual human's face, and what effect that has if you don't portray it correctly. So if you know, if you have so in that resolution experiment, we looked at if you have highly realistic characters with, you know, very complex facial rigs, you know, the facial animation of the emotion can be portrayed better on those than on lower resolution characters. So what are we going to be missing in terms of communication when, you know, you're seeing the person emote, but maybe they're not doing exactly what you want the face to do? So that was something as well that we looked at in that Frontiers paper a bit. Yeah.
Nice, thanks. So
Yeah.
we do have one question in the chat. So have you dug
Yeah.
the trust part in the relation to the virtual avatar? And thanks for the presentation. And trust or confidence?
Sorry, could you repeat the question? I'm just trying to.
I mean, you can see the question in the chat.
Oh,
So
in the chat. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
have you dug the trust part in relation to the virtual avatars?
Have we looked at trust? Is it? Have you dug the trust part in? Oh yeah, have we investigated trust? Yeah, in relation to vertical. Yeah, we've looked at trust. So yeah, we did some so we did some like games where we did a kind of a trust game. And we tried to determine if people would trust the opinion of a photorealistic avatar. This is work with Ilaria Tor that we did back about 2 years ago. Trust or confidence? Yeah, so confidence in the agent's opinions. So the agent had to give you some advice on what you should do in this particular game. This is, yeah, as I said, work with Ilaria Tor. And we did find that I'm trying to remember the results now, but we were mainly interested there in the voice and whether the voice matched the face or not. So we have done a lot of experiments on voice as well, and how a trustworthy voice comes across. But in that case, the photorealistic character with a neutral kind of appearance and a neutral voice, I think, was the most convincing or trustworthy. I may be incorrect there, but we did look at cartoon versus realistic, and to determine if you know, the more realistic character was more convincing. So yeah, so we have looked a bit at trust, but I've looked at trust as well in the lie detection kind of stuff. So we tried lie detection with realistic and cartoony versions, and we found no effect in that case, that people were just as biased towards saying somebody was telling the truth for the realistic as for the cartoony characters. So yeah, trust is it's a hard one, I suppose, to measure, but if you get the right experiment design, you know, it could be very interesting. I think one of the things that we plan to do in the future is to investigate trust with these facial feature alterations. So, you know, the big eyes and the different face to width height ratios. We're interested to see if that affects trust. It affected moral dilemmas in one of our experiments, where we where participants gave more aggressive responses when they saw a more aggressive face. So there, we do have some evidence that these facial features might have an effect, but certainly trust could be an interesting one if we apply all the knowledge from psychology on trustworthiness of a face to these, say, metahuman characters, and then see if we can create higher trust in a scenario. Yeah, definitely something that could be interesting.
Perfect. So thanks for this answer. I mean, this is the moment we should switch to the next presentation. So once again, I'm so glad you made it today, and so thank you very much. And now we will welcome some people for a panel regarding the importance of privacy and ethics in emotion recognition and emotion elicitation in virtual reality scenarios. So Jáuregui Gómez, Nadine Couture, Catherine Pélachaud et Samory Houzangbe, si vous voulez bien, if you want to come here and take the control over the screen to introduce the panel.
Just to let you know, Catherine Pélachaud is having sound issues. It's coming from her firewall, so I don't know if she will be back in a few minutes or not.
Okay, thanks for the information. We will do our best to wait for Catherine. And
no worries.
So who will share the presentation on the screen?
Hello.
Hi, David.
Hi. Sorry, I was not here.
Hi, Julien.
So okay,
Hi.
I will put the presentation
yeah,
here.
you can share the presentation on the screen here.
Okay. So I think Catherine Pélachaud had some problems.
Yeah, I mean, no worries. We can wait a few minutes, and I hope she will be able to, join for the presentation.
Okay.
You can try to share the. Yes, nice. So this is your presentations. Presentation, great. Well, let me check the room configuration. Would you like to change as it is a panel? We can switch the room configuration. Is it better for you this way? I mean, up to you. Just tell me.
Yes, I think it's good. It's good like
So
this.
people, you can join the table. The presenters, you could introduce your presentation here in front of the screen, and then you can, I'll let you drive the presentation.
All right. I will just block the options. Okay. Okay.
I don't know if there are enough seats for 25 people. Yes, you sure? Yeah. Maybe.
I mean, it's up to you. I mean, if you want me to switch the configuration, I can put the more tables. Up to you. Do we have some information regarding Catherine?
I'm investigating, yeah, but no
Thanks.
answer. No answer for now.
Yes, I think in my case, I sent her my telephone so she can call me, but I had not received any call from her. So
Okay, maybe let's wait two minutes and we'll see. I mean, she can join during the presentation also.
okay. So we have Julien, you have Samory, okay. Yes.
And Nadine is there also.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes. Actually, he sent me a message that she has some problems with the sound, but yes, I gave her my number.
So
Okay,
I'm pretty sure the technical team is currently
yes, yes, I also,
investigating
yes.
this issue. Let's wait 1 minute, and we could start the presentation, and she'll
Okay,
join as soon as her problems are solved.
okay.
The thing is, the problem is coming from a firewall, so can belongs, and because she will deal this with the IT service, so I don't know.
Okay, so I think we should start the presentation and the discussion, and she'll join as soon as the problem is solved.
Okay, yes, she sent me a message.
Yes.
She's now facing the problem with a technician. Yes, as you said, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so would you like to wait like a few minutes, or would you like to begin the presentation?
I think we can start because I will give the introduction of the context and the introduction of the panelists. So I think we can start now.
Okay, sure. So people have a seat, please, and we will begin the presentation of this panel entitled "The Importance of Privacy and Ethics in Emotion Recognition and Emotion Elicitation in Virtual Reality Scenarios." So please, David.
Okay, thank you very much. So my name is David Gómez. I'm an assistant professor at STI Institute of Technology. My research fields are in affecting computing, human-computer interaction, and also computer vision. Yes, also I'm organizing this panel with Nadine Couture, with Professor Nadine Couture, that is she's a research director from Institute of Technology, and I will be the panel interviewer. I will. As you have seen here, the title of the panel is the importance of privacy and ethics in emotion recognition and emotion elicitation in virtual reality scenarios. So in this panel, we'll have first 50 minutes of different questions that I will ask to the three speakers. And at the end, I will give some conclusions, and after we will have 10 minutes of questions from the public. So I will give now the context of the panel. So as you know, affective computing is the study and development of systems that can automatically recognize, simulate, and also elicit emotions to users. So this has been applied in several areas such as education, security, healthcare, entertainment, etc. In most of these studies, emotion recognition and elicitation have been performed using mainly non-virtual or non-immersive environments. But in recent years, affective interactions using virtual reality have been analyzed in studies which demonstrate that virtual environments can be used to recognize or elicit emotions in the user, such as relaxation, for example, stress or anxiety, etc. In addition, recent works show also that emotional content can increase the sense of immersion in a virtual reality environment. However, despite of the different studies conducted, the success of emotion recognition in virtual reality scenarios will depend on how safe can be made and how the privacy of users can be protected and respected. In addition, user must be able to trust the virtual reality scenario, knowing that their emotional states can be recognized and elicited.
Please,
So,
David, just 1 second. Catherine is there, so I guess now you have the full team.
okay, okay, great.
Sorry, yeah.
Hello, Catherine. Yes, I will continue presenting the context, and now after I will present the panelists. So the purpose of this panel is to address several points regarding ethics and privacy issues, risk, challenge, and opportunities about the impact that emotion recognition and elicitation can achieve in virtual reality scenarios. So for this panel, we have three different speakers, as I mentioned before. We have Professor Catherine Pélachaud, that is a CNRS Research Director at Samory University. Her research interests focus on affecting computing and socio-emotional agents. She's also Associate Director of several journals, including Transaction of Affective Computing, ACM, Transaction of Interactive Intelligent Systems, and also International Journal of Human-Computer Studies. So for many years, she and her collaborators have worked to develop the Greta conversational agent platform, and also she received the Autonomous Agent Research Award in 2015. So this is the first speaker. The second speaker is Dr. Julien Castet. He's the director of immersion research activities. His main areas of expertise are interaction, mixed reality, and computer music. He's also an active expert with the ANR and with the European Commission for Expertise and Project Evaluation. He conducted research on 3D interaction and haptics at the Grenoble Institute of Technology, where he obtained his PhD at the University of Grenoble. He has been also the driving force behind several projects funded by Europe since 2005. And for the third speaker, we have Dr. Samory Houzangbe. He pursued a PhD at Arts et Métiers under the supervision of Dr. Olivier Chrisman and Professor Simon Richer. In his PhD, he studied the impact on user experience in immersive virtual environments using smart wearables for biofeedback. After successfully defending his PhD, he started a postdoctoral project between Arts et Métiers and Estia Institute of Technology using physiological recording and non-verbal behavior, and he is now studying the creativity process in virtual reality during ideation tasks. Okay, so for this first question, we will start with Professor Catherine Pélachaud. So the first question, Catherine, so thank you for coming here. What do you think that are the biggest opportunities and risks of recognizing and eliciting emotions in virtual reality scenarios?
Hi, Sir David. So, first of all, I'm sorry I was late. I had a problem with sound on my computer, so it took some time to get resolved. Regarding your questions, so
yes.
So if we take, for example, there's quite a lot of scenarios on health that are being developed. It's using a VR, a virtual agent, and things like that. And of course, when you want to detect emotions on users, you have all the difficulties of detecting very sensitive data. People sometimes prefer to send out data regarding the date of birth, the gender, etc., versus their affective states. Affective states is something that is very personal and people don't like to share it. Moreover, when you share those data, you can imagine that people may manipulate the data, may use it for buildings, representation, fuels, for example, for the insurance work and things like that. So it can be extremely difficult. Emotions are also essential for humans. I mean, it's very important to be able for humans to be able to perceive the emotion in others. It's important also to manage your own emotional state when you're in social interactions. And it also allows you to take decisions. So it's very important. Emotions are very important to take them into account in the scenario you're building up. However, you need to protect the data regarding emotion in users. You need to make sure that the type of manipulation you're doing is for the well-being of the persons, not for any other reason, okay? So that's it's some elements regarding the problems of detecting emotions in humans. There's many others. There is also some cultural differences. There's also information regarding the type of emotion you can show, you can display in a given social interaction, and depending on your role and the relationship you have with the others and all that. So that's all those things that have to be taken in account. So it's a very broad answer that covers several elements, but I guess as we go through the discussion, we will be able to refine it.
Okay, thank you very much for this answer. Yes, exactly as you said. This depends a lot of the type of scenario. For example, if we consider health-related scenarios, for example, using virtual reality with emotion detection or elicitation to treat some phobias or stress management, do you think also that there are important benefits and risks to consider here?
Sorry, I was. Would you mind repeating? Because I was asked to sit down, but I got mixed up with the.
No problem. Yes, as I said, as you pointed, it's a very general question, and it also depends of the type of scenario of our application. So, for example, if we consider health-related scenarios using VR with emotion detection or elicitation to treat phobias, or also stress management, do you think that also there are important benefits and also risks to consider here?
But benefits, I mean, for sure. Otherwise, we wouldn't develop such a thing. So you can use, you can develop applications where you detect the expression of a person's and you adapt the environment to the emotional state of the persons. And the adaptation can take different forms, so it depends on what you want to do. But so that could be extremely beneficial for the users, right? That for sure. The difficulty is regarding what do you do with the data of the emotional state of the user, so it's a protection of the data. And after the type of manipulation of, or what I just said, adaptation, what you do, I mean, because you can manipulate the emotional state of a person in several ways. So you have to make sure it's for the well-being of the person. So there's two things. I mean, I think it's what is important is privacy of the data that you're extracting from the users, as well as the type of manipulation or emotional states that you induce onto users that should be considered at the ethical level.
Okay, thank you so much. Yes, I think there are many, as you say, there are many benefits, but also I think it's very we have to take care a lot of the privacy of the data. We will discuss this also. Also, thank you for your answer. We will now. I will ask the same question to Julien. Julien, what do you think that are the biggest opportunities and risk of recognizing and eliciting emotions in virtual reality scenarios?
Yeah, thank you, David. I don't know if you hear me very well because I'm in the physical space of Laval Virtual, so there is some noise. Don't hesitate to tell me if there is some problem of sound. Yeah, regarding this question, I think that there is, of course, I'm convinced about the fact that emotion detection recognition could help a lot the VR application and more or less the storytelling and the way we conceived and we designed such application. But for me, there is two cases. The first one is using such a thing in real time in order to modify, in order to play with such information regarding the users, in order to enrich the experience. and the other one is more or less the fact to have such emotion in a database and try to explore what it means in a in not in real time during the experience, but after the experience, and try to define stuff and make conclusion regarding that. For me, the first one, in real time, there is a lot of way to use, and it's really important to note that there is some bias, there is some stuff that could provide difficulty regarding emotion detection. So it could, for me, it's a complement. It can be an additional modality where you can see use case like decision making, crisis management, but also training in order to influence, for example, the process of training in real time regarding what's happened inside the users, or regarding the task involved during the training process. So there is a lot of use cases, and it's something that we have to keep in mind, because we could have this habits to focus on the technical way, how detect it, how increase the good recognition rate, but there is some stuff also to do in terms of use cases, how we could use it, and how it could be a real added value regarding the users. And for me, it's one point that I'm really interested by.
Okay, thank you so much. Yes, you said a lot about the benefits. I think there is a lot of potential here, as you said. And what do you think that could be maybe the main risk of this?
Yeah.
Or yes.
Yeah. The risk is always the same, is the fact that imagine that such a thing, this algorithm to detect and recognize an emotion, is objective and tell the truth. We have to keep in mind that there is some risk of the error of detection, or stuff that make the recognition false. This is the first thing, so we have to be careful about that. It's not the true. And another way is the capability of the algorithm to take into account the context. What I mean, I'm doing sports, and I'm in an important competition, for example. I'm scared. This scared, if we detect this emotion at this time, doesn't mean the same thing than the first, for example, meeting with my first girl, my first love story, where I'm scared, but it doesn't mean the same thing. So if we just put the terms scared in a database, it will never tell what does it mean. So I'm a little bit scared about how such emotion is not some case, so we cannot put it in a table and makes a really large conclusion about people. It is more complex, and I will be happy if we could be in line with this, and try to avoid some extreme use of such information in terms of user definition. I don't know if it's clear, but yeah.
Yes. I think it's clear. So we have to carefully. I know. As you said, the data, as you say, it can. We can have false detection. So we have to make careful to not consider to consider also good data, and also, as you say, it depends also of the context. So we have to be careful, especially where we are going to save the data, because we cannot, as you said, we cannot consider that everything could be used to maybe to improve the interaction. No.
Yeah. It's also a matter of place people in cases. You cannot say, for example, okay, David are scared with a spider, for example. Okay, it's one fact, but probably you are scared if you are in a jungle. If you are, for example, in your at home and the spider is in a box, I don't know, you're not scared. So, I mean, we have to be careful in how we could use such a thing to define people. It's not a matter it's not a matter of objective definition of a people. It's just a fact at one point at one time, and we can use it for lots of things, but not for define and not for put people in a case. That's what I want to say.
Okay, yes, of course, it's very important issue to consider that it's not maybe an objective data. So it's
Yeah,
very,
exactly.
yes, I think it's very good it could be good also to continue to discuss this. Thank you for your answer, Julien. Now, Dr. Samory, Houzangbe, for you. What are the benefits and risks of recognizing and eliciting emotion in virtual reality scenarios? Summary?
For me, I think that virtual reality as a very young technology is very, we don't know much about user experience in VR at the moment. And I feel like being able to recognize emotions or emotional reaction will be beneficial to better understanding how the user is feeling in the virtual environment and how we can enhance the experience or tame the experience depending on what type of program we want to run. Um, and to be able to adjust, as Catherine Pélachaud said earlier, be able to adjust the different factors and the experience in real time, depending on the user experience, will be or user emotion, excuse me, will be very beneficial overall for the experiment. We also know that 360 videos have been used as ways to have strong impact on user on decision making or um, even eliciting simple emotions. And some researcher, mainly Stéphane Boucher in Canada, is using VR as a way to treat phobias or and be used in psychology or rehabilitation. So eliciting emotion and being able to recognize them in VR can give like a strong advantage in like the health departments, I would say, and to detect and monitor nonverbal behavior that cannot be captured, especially in the current context, that cannot be captured in Zoom calls or Skype calls, where we cannot predict or detect emotion on the participants in the distance, and being able to provide those kinds of information to the medical professionals would help them better treat their patients in a social distancing world. But I would say that the main risk is that um, we know that VR has a long-lasting effect on participants. There are some studies that prove that people actually retain some behaviors or some emotion after the VR exposure. So inducing strong emotion could lead to strong lasting effects that stay after the experiment. And we have to be sure that this is not traumatizing and that the effects that like the retaining effects are not problematic for the participant in their daily lives or even in like the general public. So it has to be very controlled, I would say, and very depending on the context.
Okay. Yes, of course. I think the control of this is it's very important. Thank you a lot for your answer because you also say the benefits and risk. yes, effectively, for the risk, I think we have to control. And yes, regarding this control, now the question is for Catherine. Catherine, do you think that there are emotional states, for example, in recognition, on elicitation, in virtual reality applications, that we should completely avoid?
I would say no. I mean, again, I mean, it depends on the application. Because I mean, I guess you're referring maybe to negative emotion, but I mean, again, negative emotion. I mean, it's not that you should always avoid them. Sometimes, I mean, it could be beneficial, and it's. I think to what it. I think not talking only about emotions, which is important, is more on what is the goal of eliciting such emotions, which matters, right? It's what is the overall goal in the long term that matters. And yeah, I mean, eliciting extreme fear, extreme anger, may not be beneficial per se, but I think it just says don't elicit any negative emotions may not be the way to touch this problem. I think again, I mean, I think it's more what is the outcome? What do you want to achieve by looking at the emotion you want to trigger in the humans? That might be my answer.
Okay, thank you so much. So, and what with regarding the answer of Catherine, Julien, do you also agree that I mean, there are not emotional states to avoid, but it depends of the goal, as Catherine Pélachaud said. Do you think so? That do you also think that there are no emotional states to avoid? I mean, we can use whatever emotional state, but we have to be careful to the goal.
Yeah, I'm exactly. Yeah, I'm really in line with Catherine regarding this topic. I mean, we don't have to decide which kind of emotion is better than the other one, or which emotion we have to avoid. I mean, it depends of what we are doing with this, what is the conclusion behind. Yeah, there is no matter regarding that. For me, there is no question. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, thank you. And also, do you think that for this, for example, for this um, goal to maybe to some goals to avoid, maybe do you think that it could be necessary some ethics committee in order to careful to decide if the goal is maybe a good idea related to the ethics or not?
Yeah, it could be nice, and it could be nice, more or less, if we are talking about a database and something where we want to aggregated information to make a global analysis of one thing. It could be nice to have such a thing, but if we are using such a data in real time with an anonymous mechanism, and if we are just using this modality to enrich an experience, we have to be careful to not break too much the process by ethics analyzing ethics process that for me doesn't make sense if it is not record, if it is not register, if it is not, if it's just a data that is used and then erased. For me, it makes no sense to have a too large and too important process for that. That's my point of view. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for your answer. And also, what about you, Samory? Do you think that there are emotional states in virtual reality applications that we should avoid, or no?
No, I'm in line with what my colleague said. Is that there's no like science is not inherently good or bad. I feel like it really depends on the context and the user and what the end goals are. As an example, there's a lot of horror games and like eliciting fear could be considered very detrimental, but then some people do enjoy horror type experiences like horror games or horror movies. So it has to be an informed choice. People have to know what they're going into and what limits they are comfortable with. So yeah, I feel like there's no good or bad emotions to be induced, but it needs to be guided. Like if there are really strong emotions, we need to have some people guides or be trustful in putting the participant inside the experience.
Okay, thank you very much. So this is a good point. A good point that you mentioned here is the trust factor. So do you think that a user can trust a virtual reality environment that can detect and elicit their emotions?
Depends on who is providing the experiment. If it is for a medical purpose, I feel like it has to be guided with a medical professional, like a medical expert, beside the user, a practitioner that will help them, guide them, and debrief the experience after the emotion elicitation in order to keep them. It is a therapy, really. So, for example, hypnosis is a touchy subject. Some people are very sensitive to it, and some people really can be helped with hypnosis, and it can be used in virtual reality. But it has to be um, done through a professional that will help you, a health professional that will help you through the hypnosis, debrief afterwards, prepare you before, and there's a lot of condition for it to be used. So I feel like it's the same for VR. It has to be done without harming intents, and it has to be guided by someone who is capable of actually helping the participant or providing a good enough experience.
Okay, thank you very much. Also, I can ask the same question to Catherine regarding to the answer of Samory. Do you think that the user can trust a virtual reality that can detect and elicit their emotions? Or do you think also that, as Samory say, that it must be professionally guided?
I mean, trust is crucial when you're building some human-machine interaction. Could it be in VR or with robot, virtual agent, whatever? I mean, this is absolutely essential. And I mean, to trust is where users build expectancies and users have to. I mean, the machine or the VR environment has to consider humans and their good intentions matters. So, yeah, of course, you can build trust versus interactions. You really have to be to monitor that carefully and build an ethical commission. I think ethical committee is important whenever you're doing user studies nowadays. So, of course, you will have to, whenever you were going to do user studies, you will have to go through the ethical committees. So I think there's two things. I mean, one, we should be more on the research level, and the other one would be on the commercial application, and that I don't know how you can afford to have an ethical committee for application, I mean, commercial application. I guess Julien will know better this answer. But trust is crucial. Several models are taken into account. Trust that has been proposed and should be considered.
Okay, yes, thank you so much for your answer. It's very important, I think. This is the trust factor. And also, as you said, it must be regulated by a committee, an ethics committee. Now the next question for Julien. Julien, what do you think that are the risks of not protecting or not anonymizing the emotional data from users in a virtual reality scenario?
Is there another risk? Yeah, as I said before, is to have quick conclusion and probably have a disappointed process or iteration. We know that, for example, the virtual reality, in the history of the virtual reality, we observe 1, 2, 3 iteration, and we are now in the maturation of the situation with technology that is low cost, and it's more or less in line with the users, and so it's different. But in order to avoid a disappointed iteration and try to accelerate it, the use of such a thing in real situation and use case, we have to be careful about how we talk about that. We can be happy, and we can be convinced by such a thing, but we have to be objective regarding what we are demonstrating, what we are implementing, the maturity of the technology, and for example, one thing that make me question each time is, we know that users in front of a technology learn probably the tasks in the training process, for example, learn probably the tasks that we planned to train, but he learned also to play with the technology. And in such a emotion process and emotion detection, imagine that people know how to play with the technology and how artificially play with it. If you created some really important bias, and we can have for example, categorization and conclusion based on something that is really false or artificial, and I'm really concerned about that, because emotion means more than just an interaction, a classical interaction where you just have a displacement or stuff that has no matter with human and with our capability to perceive or to socially perceive the other person. So we talk about something that is really more private, and in this sense we have to be careful with this fact, and the way how users will play with the technologies.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for your answer. And what about you, Catherine? Do you think that there is a high risk in non-anonymizing or protecting the emotional data? Do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's important to anonymize the data, because you never know what people could do. Just imagine that company gets information about your emotional data, and they could use it to decide to hire you or not, or to the bank to give you a loan or not. I mean, God knows what will happen with those if the data goes around and be sold to companies or other things. So I think it's important that it is anonymized, and and should be protected.
Okay, thank you. What about you, Samory? Do you also think that there are high risk in not protecting or not anonymizing the emotional data in virtual reality applications?
Yeah, I feel it's not exclusive to virtual reality, but like being able to detect and elicit emotions, whether it be virtual reality or other, are very. It is a very touchy subject. For example, the Cambridge Analytica scandal proved how much private data, which were not even emotions, were able to affect the whole world and the political system we live in. So I feel like it is crucial um, to have the choice to actually be able to share or not our data. Some would say that they do not care about their private data on, for example, on the internet or being shared with big companies because it will help the company better target them with subject of interest, for example. But I feel like everybody should have the choice, the informed choice, to give consent on how much data they are okay to share and what they can and cannot, what companies can and cannot have access to, especially emotions.
Yeah, if I can add something is when you interact with other people, I mean, there's always a difference between the emotions you show and the emotions, so the emotion you express and the emotion you feel. So we've learned by growing up and through social interactions to somehow make these distinctions between what we can express and what we feel. So I don't see why we should give away our data on the emotion we feel to everyone or to people we don't know, and we don't know what will happen. I mean, we should have in control the type of information that is being distributed. We do it all the time with in interaction, and I think it is important to maintain it.
Okay,
Yeah,
yes.
it is a very good point. I actually agree a lot with what Catherine just said.
Yes, yes, actually, thank you. Also, yes, we will now maybe regarding the answer of Samory. So, Samory say that maybe there is no difference in using anonymization or protection of the data in using virtual reality applications or maybe real world applications. So Samory say that it's the same risk. So the question for you, Catherine, do you think that there are different ethical implications of affecting computing systems between real life scenarios and VR scenarios? Or do you think maybe it's the same ethical implications?
I would say it's the same implication. I mean, VR is, as you present it right now, I mean, it's a setting. It shouldn't change the way you treat humans, participants in an interaction, I would say. So I would say we should apply the same ethical value.
Thank you. And what about you, Julien? Do you agree with Catherine that we have to establish the same rules because there are no difference in ethical issues of affecting computing systems between VR scenarios and real life scenarios? Do you think also that it's the same? There are the same ethical issues?
Yeah. There is the same ethical issues. We can have in such a situation the idea that the people inside the VR headset is more or less more fragile because he's in immersion, so you can play with him and you can. But in for example in EHM in a computer human interaction evaluation process, you have also some protocol that where you play with the users. I just mentioned, for example, the magician does evaluation, where you lie to the users to try to evaluate something that doesn't exist before to prototype the device, for example. And you play with the users. If the rule is clear, there is no matter. And for the immersive experience, it's the same. If the rule is clear, if the users is aware about what will happen, or what is happened after the evaluation or after the experience. I mean, for me, there is no difference. It's exactly the same.
Okay, thank you for your answer. And what about you, Samory? Are you also in line with this conclusion that there are no different ethical issues of affective computing system between real life scenarios and VR scenarios?
Yeah, I agree. I feel like inducing emotion in virtual reality or in the real world can be the same. A lot of people have argued that virtual reality was dangerous because it would cut people off from the real world, and that in doing so, it would inducing emotion in virtual reality with the high immersive factor would be detrimental to people and their life in the real world. But I feel like it's the same with every technology. People can develop bad habits or addiction to the virtual environment or to different kinds of experience. So I feel it's a marginal effect, and overall the same rules will apply. It is if it is not ethical in real life, it is not ethical in virtual reality, and if it is not ethical in virtual reality, it is not ethical in real life.
Okay, yes, okay, so thank you so much for your answer. Okay, now we have 10 minutes left. I will now summarize all you have said, and after we will have some also minutes from question from the public. Uh, as you said, emotion detection and elicitation in virtual reality applications, we have seen that have a lot of potential for many benefits because using virtual reality interactions, we can make the interaction more closer and more adapted to the user. So these benefits also depends. Also, we say that you say that it depends of the type of the virtual reality scenario or application. For example, we mentioned some therapy applications, stress management, maybe some other type of scenarios as entertainment, as advertiser, maybe e-learning. In general, I think the biggest opportunities, as you said, it's because we can maybe understand better the user to propose better experience. However, as Julien said, if we sometimes, the emotions are something more subjective. Detecting the emotion, maybe we have to be careful in using this data because maybe some users can experience different emotions for the same experience. So we have to be careful of this. So one important this here is that emotion is not objective; it's more something subjective experience. We have also talked about the risk. So in the risk, for example, we say that effectively important to anonymize and protect the data, the emotional data. So that's why an ethics committee can be necessary. But it's not, we said, as Catherine Pélachaud said, is not about negative or positive emotions. It's more about what is the goal or what is the goal of this application that will use this emotional data. So one important question to consider is how we can strict control the emotional experience that it will not be also traumatizing to the user. And what point that was mentioned by Samory is that trust is a very important factor. However, this is not easy, and we said yes. You said that also, Samory, that it must be normally guided by a professional, because in order to improve trust for this virtual reality application that will recognize and elicit the emotion. So also Julien said one important thing, that maybe certain user can change the emotions. So maybe we have to, as he said before, we have to be very careful maybe in anonymizing or protecting this data. And also we have to avoid that this data can be used by third person, because maybe we don't know exactly what they are going to do with this data. Yes, also we have discussed that there are not really ethical difference between reality applications and virtual reality applications, because the motion recognition experience and elicitation can be the same. So maybe there is no need to establish different ethical rules. But however, I think the privacy is very important. So what we have discussed here is that the benefits are a lot, but we have, in general, we have to be careful with the emotional data, because maybe can be this data can be used by third person with maybe with not very good reasons. So that it's a new technology. I think before totally implementing application doing this emotional data with virtual reality, we have to consider a lot about all the risks that can bring also any possibility that we will have, because I mean there is a lot of potential of this kind of applications. So now we will go from question from the public. Somebody have some questions to maybe to Professor Catherine or to Dr. Julien or Dr. Samory? So there are some questions, or okay, nobody. Okay, yes, raise your hand if you have some question. Okay, I imagine that there are no questions. Yes, I don't know. Professor Catherine, Samory, Julien, do you want to add something before to close this panel?
Let's say that yeah, taking into account emotions is it's a very complex questions and should be dealt with carefully. Nowadays, I mean, there's several theory of emotions, and the latest theory are quite important because they take into account also the social context or the context the person are in to be able to understand the emotion that the person may feel, and we should make sure that we have such a complex models into our we built into our agent in virtual reality, and that really requires also a great variety of sensors, not only maybe visual, acoustic sensors, but maybe also tactile sensors. So I think we are in the right direction for the community, but we shouldn't simplify the complexity of emotion. Emotion is has many factors.
Yes, I agree that it's very complex data, so that's with also we have to be careful. What about you, Julien, Samory? Do you want to add something before closing this panel?
One thing that could be mentioned, it's really fun because it's probably one of the big issue that is one of the big solution of another thing. What I want to say is that the emotion is probably the key at the end of the trust in the digital technologies. For example, imagine to engage your company or sign a contract in a fully virtual world like this. I think there is no several director or people that will engage their life through something where you cannot have this context to know what is the emotion of people in front of you. You cannot have all the information that is required to engage your life or something which is really important for you. And for me, the emotion is really difficult, is a really hard point, really, but it will probably solve and probably be the next step that push our job in another dimension, in another thing, which will be probably more engaging as a solution.
Okay, thank you. And your summary, you want to add something before to close this? Or it's okay?
Yeah. I'd like to add that it's very true that emotion elicitation and emotion recognition will push virtual reality and even augmented reality forward in what we can do with it and what application we can propose and develop. Um, but however, I feel like it should not be virtual reality should not be taken to replace completely real experiences. Sorry, especially in training situation, for example, for firefighters or in the medical field. Uh, I feel like the more advanced it gets, the more it will be used. It is already being used. Is being used for quite some time, and these with emotional elicitation, those scenarios will be more and more realistic and adapted to the different experience we want to provide to people. But it is crucial to recognize that it cannot replace actual experience and that it should be part of the process, complete the process of training or uh, medical treatment, for example, but it should not replace actual experience and actual people.
Okay, thank you very much. So thank you very much for coming and answering all the questions. So now the panel is finished. I don't know. So I'm very glad to do this. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you for organizing such a panel.
Okay, thank you very much. So now it's time to have lunch. Thank you for the interesting presentation and discussion, and I'll see you this afternoon for the rest of the conference for the next part.
Okay, thank you.
Vous m'entendez?
Oui, très bien.
Oui.
Bonjour Nadine, rebonjour.
Bonjour Geoffrey. C'est rigolo de se retrouver comme ça dans le monde virtuel.
Oui, oui, je t'entends aussi.
Ah, David,
Oui.
Samory aussi nous entend très bien.
Oui,
Non,
oui.
mais
Ouais, je pense que c'est sur toute le son est partagé sur toute la salle, toute la pièce.
Ah, pardon, oui, d'accord.
Oui,
Oui,
si vous
c'est
voulez
ça, c'est
avoir des
exactement ça, il n'est pas
discussions privées,
spécialisé ici. C'est un grand
juste à
volume.
l'extérieur, il y a une zone bleue si vous le souhaitez, si vous voulez discuter en privé.
Ouais, juste devant là.
Merci,
à
Nicolas.
l'extérieur, vous avez une zone privée.
okay. Yes, it's
Super. Ok, là il y a Albert qui est tout seul. Bon. Je vais voir dehors s'il y a des gens.